If your rear end is in a chair and you don't have a gun in your hand, that's not real instruction. Why bring people out of their home, charge them money to give them information or anything they could get for free off the internet in a video? It doesn't make sense. When you come to us for the 101 class, it's primarily hands-on because that's where the real learning is. You want to pay me to give you a lecture on cleaning a gun or taking a gun apart or what a head stamp is, or I don't want to do that kind of lecture, and you shouldn't want to pay me to do that kind of a lecture. That's not a good use of your time. Our preference is to have a gun in your hand just about the whole time you're there with us, because that's what training is.
But isn't that a way to learn, for example, safety?
The safety rules are everywhere. The 4 universal safety rules. They have them on little cards. They even give them to you on sheets with airsoft guns when you buy them. Safety rules are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And if that were effective in making people safe, then there wouldn't be gun accidents. There are people who've had gun accidents that knew the safety rules, but it didn't matter. So memorizing safety rules will not keep you safe. And the double whammy there is that you bring people in, you sit them in the classroom, and you teach them the safety rules, and then you tell them, don't forget the safety rules. And now they've had the illusion that, oh, okay, I've been properly schooled in safety. Well, that's not an effective strategy in our mind. Safety has to be trained, not taught. And what I mean by that is that what makes you safe with a handgun is safe handling habits, safe handling behavior that's been turned into habit. That takes a lot of repetition. That goes back to handling. You have to have sufficient handling time to start laying the foundation for those safe handling habits. And that's where they fall short. They don't do that because there's not enough handling time in these classes. We can do things by not having firearms in the class. We can tremendously increase the handling time. And the other thing is that when people start with anything, the learning process, there's mistakes. People are going to make mistakes. Well, when you have firearms in the environment, you can't afford that. You can't do that. You have to manage the class from the standpoint of risk management. And once you do that, you can't allow people to make mistakes. Well, we want to give the student enough handling time so that if they're going to mess up, we want them to make the mistakes in the class so we can catch it and deal with it. If we minimize handling, like we would have to do if we trained with firearms, yeah, we could get you through the class day without any accidents. And then we'd send them home and say, good luck and hope you don't mess up. But you really haven't tested the student because they haven't handled the gun enough to see what are they going to do once they get home. You've kept them on the straight and narrow in a rigidly controlled environment, but what happens when they leave that environment? Okay, and we don't believe that that's a good strategy for safety. Another problem with all these other shooting schools is when they take you out on a range, it's cattle call firing line, and that's a holdover from military traditions. So they'll have 10, 15, 20 people on a line firing. Of course, the military has to do it that way because it's, not practical to do it any other way. But when you're on a firing line, one, it's higher risk because you've got all these guys with guns and you don't know, what their safety level is, so they have to be rigidly monitored. And also, it's not conducive to getting a lot of one-on-one attention. It's not individualized. It's like line dancing with a gun. Everybody does the same thing at the same time, and you hope everybody does what they're supposed to do, but they may or may not. In 2009, my daughter and I decided to do a little experiment. We had a lot of the equipment that my daughter had used to train when she was shooting. And we thought, just for the sake of experimentation, out of curiosity, we found one of her stepsister's friends who was about 13 and never touched a gun before. We thought, well, why don't we get permission from her parents and see how much skill building we can do with her in one day with a handgun. And we found, lo and behold, that by teaching hands-on skill, skipping all the informational stuff, she could shoot pretty well just in a couple of hours. And that's where we got the idea of making this different type of training available for people so they could pick it up quickly. Once they have the physical skills down, then they can step up to higher power, deal with the concussion, and they can become proficient much more quickly than traditional training methods. People come to us to take our one-on-one class. The most common remark that we get is, "Man, I've learned a lot from you guys." We get a lot of one-on-one students that have taken the NRA basic courses, the other generic basic courses, and they come in. They don't feel like they've learned enough. They don't have a handle on it. And based on the way we train, they get a lot of handling time, and they really know their stuff once they go through our class. But the main thing is, once they go through our class, we've adequately prepared them to understand that once they go to higher power, they're going to have different issues that they're going to have to deal with. But we prepare them for that. It's not a surprise.
What is your daughter's background in regard to shooting?
My daughter started shooting when she was about, I think, 7 years old. She was shooting a black powder revolver that a friend of mine had picked up and we'd play around with, and she seemed to enjoy that. And she shot some air rifles, and it was just casual stuff. We'd go out in the desert and put beer cans out, shake them up, and she'd shoot them with the rifle. But I realized when she was about 9 or 10, and I thought about getting training for her, particularly with handgun, you couldn't get any organization to train a minor. And to this day, a lot of organizations won't take a minor. But what I did find is that there were shooting groups, organized shooting groups, that were happy to have a minor there, and then the experienced shooters, or the people who coached and ran the matches, were happy to work with her for free. And as a result, that actually worked out well, because she got much better experience from doing that than had she got in a training class. In fact, when she turned 14, I was able to get her into one of these tactical schools here in Southern California that I won't name. And the only way we could do that is because one of the guys that she shot with also knew the owner of the school, and he agreed to put her in, even though she was 14, and they wouldn't necessarily take anyone under 21. But it was totally, I think we paid $150 for 1 day of instruction, and it was totally anticlimactic. She didn't learn anything that she hadn't already learned from the competitive sports action shooters. We were listening to this old salty guy, lots of profanity, war stories, irrelevant stuff that, might have been entertaining to somebody, but it just was a big, I didn't care for it, my daughter didn't care for it. It didn't lend anything to the class. And again, same issue, too much classroom, too little shooting time, and the shooting that she did just was the same thing she would do with the IDPA or IPSC groups. It really had nothing to do with skill. So what we do is we encourage our people. Our one-on-one class is designed to prepare people to go on to do that type of shooting. Whether they do or not is up to them, but that is really the most economical way to to further your experience is to connect with one of those groups. It's the match fees are like $20. The people there are happy to give you feedback and coach you and tell you how to do things, and that's the way to go. Now, if you want to go to a tactical school later on, you can do that, but they're pricey. They tend to waste a lot of ammunition. It tends to be more organized practice than really skill building.
So can you talk about grip and stance?
Yeah, that's the common fundamental that is frequently misapplied when people are missing due to reactive interference. The tactical schools will frequently use a firm grip to counteract the effect of reactive interference. There's a very popular video out there by one of the big name shooters that says, I think the title of it is Why Aiming is Useless. Well, if you watch the content of the video, what he's basically saying is that you deal with reactive interference with a firm grip. That's the bottom line. And it will have some kind of buffering effect, but that doesn't solve the problem. That doesn't give you cognitive control. It's just using grip to counteract it. Again, most people who want to shoot well don't want a Band-Aid approach. They want to solve the core problem. And you have to do that through the method that we laid out in Mastery of the Handgun, which is the Zen of the Handgun or the Silverado method. You have to be able to pull the trigger back, expect the explosion, get hit with the concussion, and not react to it. And that is a very painstaking mental discipline if you want to do that, because there's a lot of natural wiring that goes against that. But it can be done. It's just a discipline, and you have to learn how to do it. If you want to just Band-Aid approach it and do it with grip, well, it's your call. You're buying the ammo. But a lot of people want to be able to shoot better than that, and we want to enable them to do that. There's this mythology around grip, and you can see it out there. There's other videos. One that comes to mind is grip is grip why you're missing. Well, no, it's not why you're missing. You're moving the barrel. That's why you're missing. And that's the only reason you're going to miss. You move the barrel. The grip, you may have better grips, but if you're using grip to counteract motion you're putting in the gun, you need to change the way you're shooting. The reaction to concussion is a totally natural physiological reaction. And people who mistakenly call it a flinch, and they'll say, oh, I learned not to flinch. Okay, I can get you to flinch. I'll just light an M80 behind you that you don't know about. I guarantee you will flinch. So you don't control flinch. That's wired into you. What you can, with practice, learn to control is your conditioned reaction to an explosion that you know is going to come when you pull the trigger. That you can do. It takes work. It's nothing you're going to do quickly, but if you follow the method that we laid out in The Secret to Mastery, it will work. It's just how disciplined you are in applying it. But it's very successful. When we take people out to the 201 class, the hardest people to break of bad habits and get to slow down and do it correctly are the people who've been through tactical training. because they've got this habit of just snapping the trigger or getting off the shot fast, and we've got to stop that. The easiest people to train are women who have never been exposed to shooting before. So they've gone through our 101 class, they get the mechanics down, they feel comfortable with the gun, and we tell them up front what's going to happen. We prepare them for it so they know. And they very quickly will pick up the skill, and we can see it. It's very easy to see. You'll see them, they'll start out, first shot will be great, maybe second and third shot, and then they'll start to miss, and then they'll start hitting again, and they'll consistently hit. And we can tell we just watch them shoot. We watch what they do with the front of the gun. The big telltale sign is they'll start to dip the barrel, they'll stop themselves, they'll pull it back up, and you can tell they've got it at that point. And it's just a matter of reinforcing it by doing it over and over again. And they don't miss anymore. And people don't realize that it's really great to go out, take a gun, load it up, 9mm, and hit everything that you want to hit and not waste any rounds. And there's really no reason to waste ammunition. It's a foolish way. It's a foolish notion to think that if I just throw enough lead, at some point I'm magically going to start hitting the target. Well, it's a random statistical probability. If I shoot 50 rounds at a steel plate, a certain proportion of them are going to hit. Just like throwing spaghetti against a wall, so, a couple strands are going to stick, sure, but we kind of think that's a dumb way to go about building accuracy and learning skill.
What are your thoughts on dry fire practice?
Yeah, dry fire practice, and there's some confusion about what exactly dry fire practice is. We're not saying don't practice holster draws. We're not saying you can't practice reloads. You can't practice your grip, coming up, sighting, and that sort of thing. Dry firing a gun is pulling the trigger, activating the firing mechanism on an empty chamber. And if you're doing that at home, two big problems with it. One, you're engaging in an unsafe practice, okay? And two, you're making that unsafe practice an unsafe habit, because if you do it enough, it's a behavior that ends up in your cerebellum, and which is the seat of habit, and you're setting yourself up to engage in a habitual act, and then you're going to be explaining how that hole got in your living room wall. And that's not something that you want to do. So pulling a trigger on a gun should never ever be habitual behavior. And when you dry fire practice, by pulling the trigger, that's what you're doing. And it's an unsafe act. So you're programming an unsafe act into your brain. Maybe all the competitive shooters try to sell you on it, and they do it. And that's fine. They're competitive shooters. They can do what they want. Their career may live or die on 0.02 of a second. So if there is some demonstrated value to it, if nothing else, it just makes them believe that they're prepared for competition. That's them. But if you're not a competitive shooter, and you're not going to be a competitive shooter, I don't see any reason to do it. It's not going to solve the problem of reactive interference, because how do you train yourself to deal with something when that something isn't there? That's the bottom line. I mean, think about it. If I went up to an archer and suggested to him, if you dry fire your bow, it'll make you a better archer, and he's going to think I've lost my mind. And logically, that's correct. How is it possible dry firing a bow would make me better at archery? Well, it won't. It'll just screw the bow up. How's the gun any different? Clicking the mechanism on the gun, what is that doing? You know, you're not getting any targeting feedback. And yeah, you can stick a laser in it and say, okay, that's where the laser went, but that's not where the shot's going to go if you don't have control over your reaction to the concussion. Because the minute you reintroduce concussion, you're right back to square one. You're going to start reacting to it. So dry fire is kind of it's unsafe and it's unproductive.